Marcus Thompson had always been different from the other recruits, though not in the way anyone expected. Standing barely 5 feet 8 inches tall with a lean frame that looked more suited for a library than a battlefield, he drew skeptical glances from the moment he stepped off the transport truck at the Royal Guard training facility in Windsor. The other recruits towered over him, their broad shoulders and confident swagger marking them as the cream of the British military crop. The morning mist hung heavy over the ancient grounds as Marcus shouldered his kit bag and followed the stream of new arrivals toward the imposing stone buildings that would be their home for the next 6 months. The Royal Guard selection process was legendary in its difficulty, with only 1 in 20 candidates making it through to completion. These weren't ordinary soldiers seeking entry into the Queen's personal protection detail. They were already proven warriors from the Parachute Regiment, the Royal Marines, and other elite units. Sergeant Major William Hartley stood like a granite monument at the entrance to the barracks, his weathered face scanning each recruit with the intensity of a predator sizing up prey. His uniform was immaculate, every crease sharp enough to cut paper, and his chest bore the ribbons of campaigns that stretched back to the Falklands. When his steel-gray eyes fell upon Marcus, they lingered for a moment longer than necessary, a slight frown creasing his brow. "You sure you're in the right place, lad?" Hartley's voice carried the authority of 3 decades in service, each word precisely delivered. "The Boy Scouts meet down the road on Tuesdays." A ripple of laughter spread through the assembled recruits, and Marcus felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment. He had heard variations of this joke his entire military career, ever since he had enlisted in the Army at 18. Despite graduating top of his class from basic training and earning commendations during his tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, his slight build and quiet demeanor made him an easy target for those who equated physical intimidation with military prowess. "No, sir," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the knot forming in his stomach. "I'm here for Royal Guard selection." Hartley's eyebrows rose slightly, and he consulted his clipboard with theatrical precision. "Marcus Thompson, formerly of the 3rd Battalion Parachute Regiment." He looked up again, his expression skeptical. "Says here you're a marksman. That right?" "Yes, sir." "Well, we'll see about that." Hartley's tone suggested he had serious doubts about Marcus's credentials. "Drop your kit in Barrack Block C, Bed 14. Formation in 30 minutes for initial briefing." The barracks were a study in controlled chaos as 30 men claimed their allocated spaces and attempted to establish some semblance of order in their new environment. Marcus found himself between 2 imposing figures who couldn't have been more different from each other or from him. On his left was James Mitchell, a former Royal Marine commando whose scarred hands spoke of close-quarters combat experience, and on his right was David Parker, a strapping Welshman from the Special Air Service whose reputation had preceded him even into this elite company. "Bloody hell," Parker muttered as he watched Marcus struggle to reach the top shelf of his wall locker. "Did they lower the height requirements while I wasn't looking?" Mitchell chuckled, a sound like gravel in a cement mixer. "Maybe they're trying out a new stealth program. Send in the small one. Nobody notices him." Marcus had learned long ago that responding to such comments only encouraged more of the same, so he continued unpacking his gear in silence. His methodical approach to organizing his equipment was born of necessity rather than obsession. When you were smaller than everyone around you, efficiency and preparation became your best allies. The initial briefing took place in a hall that had witnessed decades of similar speeches to countless groups of hopeful soldiers. Colonel Harrison, the commanding officer of the Guard training program, was a distinguished man in his 50s whose bearing spoke of both aristocratic background and hard-earned military experience. His voice carried easily through the high-ceilinged room as he outlined the challenges that lay ahead. "Gentlemen, you are here because you represent the finest soldiers Her Majesty's forces have to offer," Harrison began, his gaze sweeping across the assembled recruits. However, being the best in your previous units means nothing here. This is where we separate the truly exceptional from the merely excellent. He gestured to a large board behind him that displayed the training schedule in precise, color-coded detail. Over the next 24 weeks, you will be tested in every conceivable aspect of military excellence: physical fitness, weapons proficiency, tactical awareness, ceremonial duties, personal protection techniques, and psychological resilience will all be pushed beyond anything you have previously experienced. Marcus studied the schedule with growing concern. The physical training component was particularly daunting, with standards that seemed designed for men significantly larger than himself. The weapons training was extensive, covering everything from close protection pistol work to long-range precision shooting, but it was the emphasis on hand-to-hand combat that worried him most. The Queen's Guard represents the pinnacle of military tradition and operational excellence, Harrison continued. You will learn to move with the precision of a ballet dancer and strike with the force of a sledgehammer. Those who prove themselves worthy will earn the right to stand watch over the crown jewels, protect the royal family, and represent the very best of British military tradition. As the briefing concluded and the recruits were dismissed to begin their first day of training, Marcus noticed the way the others naturally formed into groups. The former SAS men gravitated toward each other, sharing knowing looks and inside jokes from their special forces background. The Marines clustered together, their easy camaraderie born of shared experiences in the most challenging environments on Earth. Marcus found himself walking alone, once again the outsider looking in. The first week of training was a brutal introduction to the standards expected of potential royal guards. Physical training sessions began before dawn with runs through Windsor Great Park that left even the fittest recruits gasping for breath. The pace was relentless, designed to identify weaknesses and eliminate those who couldn't maintain the required standard under pressure. Marcus struggled during these early sessions, his shorter stride forcing him to work harder than his longer-legged companions to maintain position in the formation. He could hear whispered comments behind him, speculation about how long the little one would last before washing out of the program. The instructors seemed to share these doubts, their encouragement notably absent when he fell behind during particularly challenging exercises. Combat training revealed another area where Marcus appeared to be at a disadvantage. The hand-to-hand combat sessions paired recruits against each other in rotating combinations, and Marcus consistently found himself facing opponents who possessed significant advantages in reach, weight, and leverage. While his technique was sound and his determination undeniable, the reality of physics meant that he absorbed more punishment than he delivered. After one particularly bruising session, Marcus sat alone in the medical bay, having his split lip treated by the course medic, a grizzled corpsman named Stevens, who had seen countless recruits come and go over the years. "Rough day?" Stevens asked as he applied antiseptic to the cut. "Nothing I can't handle," Marcus replied, though his voice lacked conviction. Stevens paused in his work, studying the young soldier's face. "You know, I've been patching up guard recruits for 15 years, seen all types come through these doors. The big ones, the strong ones, the fast ones. Some make it, some don't. And the small ones? Well," Stevens continued his work with practiced efficiency, "sometimes the smallest packages contain the biggest surprises. Wouldn't be the first time someone surprised everyone, including themselves." As the second week began, the training intensified with the introduction of specialized weapons instruction. The recruits were divided into groups based on their previous experience and demonstrated aptitude, with separate tracks for close protection work, ceremonial duties, and tactical operations. Marcus found himself assigned to the general category, neither excelling nor failing badly enough to warrant special attention. The weapons training took place on ranges that had been modernized with the latest target systems and ballistic monitoring equipment. Each recruit was issued a standard SA-80 assault rifle and L96A1 sniper rifle, along with various sidearms used by protection details. The instructors were experienced marksmen themselves, former Special Forces operators whose expertise in their field was beyond question. Warrant Officer Collins ran the rifle ranges with the precision of a Swiss timepiece. A former sniper with the SAS, he had operated in every major conflict of the past 2 decades and possessed an almost mystical understanding of ballistics and fieldcraft. His standards were exacting, and his patience with mediocrity was notably limited. "Marksmanship is both art and science," Collins explained to the assembled recruits on their first morning at the range. "Any fool can pull a trigger, but consistently placing rounds exactly where you want them, under pressure, at distance, in adverse conditions, that separates the professionals from the pretenders." The initial assessment involved standard static shooting at various distances, progressing from 100 to 600 meters. Marcus took his position on the firing line with the same methodical preparation he applied to everything else, checking and rechecking his equipment before settling into a stable shooting position. The targets at 100 meters seemed almost insultingly large to someone who had spent years engaging Taliban fighters at much greater distances in Afghanistan. His first group of 5 rounds clustered tightly around the bullseye, earning a grudging nod from Collins as he examined the target through binoculars. "Not bad, Thompson. Let's see how you do when we step back a bit." As the range increased, Marcus's consistency remained impressive. While other recruits began to show wider shot dispersion and occasional misses, his groups remained tight and well-centered. By the time they reached the 600-meter line, he had quietly established himself as one of the better shooters in the group, though his soft-spoken demeanor meant that few of his fellow recruits had noticed. The following days introduced more complex shooting scenarios, including timed exercises, multiple target engagements, and shooting from various positions and angles. Marcus's performance continued to improve. His natural ability complemented by an almost obsessive attention to detail in his preparation and execution. He studied wind conditions with the intensity of a meteorologist, calculated ballistic trajectories in his head, and made minute adjustments to his position that others would never have considered. However, his excellence on the shooting range did little to change his standing among the other recruits. The physical training sessions continued to highlight his limitations, and his quiet nature made it easy for others to overlook his growing reputation among the instructors. During mess hall conversations, he remained largely invisible, listening to the boastful stories and good-natured rivalry of men who were accustomed to being the best at everything they attempted. Parker, the Welsh SAS veteran, had emerged as one of the informal leaders among the recruits, his experience and natural charisma drawing others to him like iron filings to a magnet. He regaled his tablemates with stories of operations in hostile territory, his voice carrying the easy confidence of a man who had faced death multiple times and lived to joke about it. "I remember this one time in Syria," Parker said, gesturing with his fork for emphasis. "We had to take out a sniper who was giving our lads serious grief. Bastard was good, too. Picked off 3 of our guys from about 800 meters before we could even locate his position." Mitchell leaned forward, interested despite himself. "How'd you get him?" "Well, that's where it gets interesting. My oppo was this bloke from Hereford, quiet type, looked like an accountant. But I'm telling you, when it came to long-range work, he was something else entirely. Set up a shot from nearly a kilometer away, single round, game over." Marcus listened to the story while mechanically eating his dinner, wondering what it would be like to have such tales to tell, to command that kind of respect from peers who were themselves elite soldiers. In his own unit, he had been valued for his shooting ability, but these men had operated at levels he could only imagine. The 3rd week brought the introduction of advanced marksmanship techniques and longer-range shooting. The training moved to a more sophisticated range complex that could accommodate shots out to 1,200 meters, with computer-controlled target systems and environmental monitoring equipment that provided real-time feedback on shooting conditions. Collins addressed the group with his usual no-nonsense approach. "This is where we separate the marksmen from the snipers. At these ranges, everything matters. Wind speed and direction, air pressure, temperature, humidity, even the rotation of the Earth becomes a factor. Miss any one of these variables, and you might as well be throwing rocks." The recruits were introduced to more sophisticated optical equipment and ballistic computers that could calculate firing solutions for complex shots. However, Collins made it clear that while technology was useful, true expertise came from understanding the fundamental principles and developing an instinctive feel for the countless variables that affected bullet flight. "Technology can fail," he warned, tapping the expensive ballistic computer mounted on his demonstration rifle. "Batteries die, electronics malfunction, and equipment gets damaged. The knowledge in your head and the skill in your hands, that's what you can always count on." Marcus absorbed these lessons with an intensity that bordered on obsession. While other recruits treated the advanced marksmanship training as just another box to check in their progression through the course, he approached it with the dedication of a scholar studying ancient texts. He spent his free time reading ballistics manuals, studying meteorological data, and practicing dry-fire exercises until his trigger control became as natural as breathing. The first long-range shooting exercise called for engaging targets at 800 meters under varying wind conditions. The instructors had deliberately chosen a day when atmospheric conditions were challenging. With gusty crosswinds that shifted direction unpredictably, most recruits found themselves struggling to achieve consistent results, their shots scattered across the target face as they failed to properly account for wind drift. Marcus settled into his shooting position with the same methodical precision he brought to every task. But there was something different in his demeanor. For the first time since arriving at the facility, he appeared completely at ease, as if he had finally found something that truly suited him. He spent several minutes studying the vegetation around the range, watching how the wind affected the movement of grass and leaves at different distances. His first shot struck the target dead center, earning surprised looks from the instructors monitoring his position. His second and third rounds followed in rapid succession, each one finding the small aiming point with mechanical precision. By the time he had fired his allotted 10 rounds, it was clear that something exceptional had just occurred. Collins approached Marcus's position with a mixture of curiosity and professional interest. Through his spotting scope, he could see that all 10 rounds had struck within a circle smaller than a man's fist, a level of precision that would have been impressive under ideal conditions and was nothing short of remarkable given the challenging wind. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Collins asked quietly, his usual gruff demeanor replaced by genuine professional respect. Marcus looked up from his rifle, his expression modest despite what he had just accomplished. "My grandfather taught me when I was young. He was a gamekeeper on a large estate in Scotland. Spent every summer with him from age 8 until I joined the army." "And in the army?" "Designated marksman with the Paras. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq. Mostly overwatch and counter-sniper work." Collins nodded slowly, processing this information. The designated marksman role was significantly different from the general infantry position most of the recruits had held in their previous units. It required specialized training and demonstrated exceptional shooting ability, but it also meant operating semi-independently, often in positions where a single shot could determine the success or failure of an entire operation. As word of Marcus's performance spread among the instructors, attitudes began to shift subtly. The physical training staff still pushed him relentlessly, but there was a new undertone of respect in their corrections and encouragement. His shooting instructors began paying more attention to his technique and offering advanced tips that they normally reserved for their most promising students. However, among his fellow recruits, little had changed. The shooting performance was impressive, but it represented only one aspect of the multifaceted selection process. Physical fitness, combat skills, leadership potential, and psychological resilience all carried equal weight in the final evaluation, and Marcus still appeared to be struggling in several of these areas. The evening after his exceptional shooting demonstration, Marcus sat alone in the barracks, cleaning his rifle with the obsessive care that had become his trademark. Around him, the other recruits engaged in their usual evening activities, writing letters home, reading, or engaging in the kind of casual conversation that builds bonds between soldiers facing shared challenges. Parker wandered over, ostensibly to retrieve something from his wall locker, but clearly motivated by curiosity about the day's events. "Heard you shot pretty well today," he said casually, his Welsh accent giving the words a musical quality. "It was decent," Marcus replied without looking up from his weapon. "Decent?" Parker laughed. "Collins has been training shooters for 20 years, and he told Sergeant Major Hartley it was the best shooting he's seen from a recruit in a decade." Marcus paused in his cleaning, looking up at Parker with surprise. He hadn't realized that his performance had generated that level of interest among the staff. "Look," Parker continued, his tone becoming more serious, "I know some of the lads have been giving you a hard time. It's nothing personal. It's just the way these things work. Everyone's trying to figure out where they stand, and sometimes that means making yourself feel better by putting someone else down. I understand. The thing is, what happened today, that changes things. Shooting like that, especially under those conditions, that's not luck or accident. That's skill at a level that most of us will never reach, no matter how hard we train." Marcus nodded but didn't respond, unsure where this conversation was heading. "What I'm saying is, don't let the other stuff get to you. We're all good at different things. And what you did today was something special. The staff noticed, and eventually, everyone else will too." As Parker returned to his own area of the barracks, Marcus reflected on the conversation. For the first time since arriving at the facility, he began to consider that perhaps he belonged here after all. The shooting was just one component of the selection process, but it was one where he could genuinely excel. Maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to carry him through the challenges that lay ahead. The fourth week of training brought an unexpected announcement that would change everything. Colonel Harrison stood before the assembled recruits in the same hall where they had received their initial briefing, but his expression was more serious than before. Behind him, several men in civilian clothes sat quietly, their bearing and watchful eyes suggesting they were not ordinary visitors. "Gentlemen, we have been presented with a unique opportunity," Harrison began, his voice carrying an undercurrent of excitement. "These gentlemen represent various special operations units and are here to observe a demonstration of our advanced marksmanship capabilities. More importantly, they will be selecting one recruit to participate in a joint training exercise with international special forces units." A murmur of interest rippled through the group. Joint training exercises with elite units were rare opportunities that could significantly advance a military career. The chance to work alongside SAS, Delta Force, and other legendary units was the kind of experience that created legends and opened doors throughout the military hierarchy. "The selection will be based on a comprehensive shooting assessment that will test your abilities under the most challenging conditions possible," Harrison continued. "This is not just about accuracy. It's about adaptability, mental toughness, and the ability to perform when everything is on the line." One of the civilian observers rose and moved to the front of the room. He was a tall, lean man with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent in hostile environments. When he spoke, his accent was unmistakably American, and his calm authority commanded immediate attention. "I'm Colonel James Reed, United States Army Special Operations Command, he introduced himself. What we're looking for is someone who can think on their feet, adapt to changing conditions, and maintain precision under extreme pressure. The assessment tomorrow will simulate real-world scenarios where one shot can mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The evening was electric with nervous energy as recruits prepared for what many saw as the most important test of their military careers. In the barracks, small groups formed around the most experienced marksmen, seeking advice and sharing theories about what the assessment might entail. Parker and several of the former Special Forces operators held court at one end of the room, their confidence unshaken by the prospect of additional scrutiny. Marcus sat alone at his usual spot, methodically cleaning his equipment while listening to the conversations swirling around him. Despite his recent shooting success, he harbored no illusions about his chances in whatever competition lay ahead. The other recruits had years of special operations experience, advanced training courses, and reputations built in combat zones around the world. He was still the quiet outsider who happened to be good with a rifle. "You planning to give it a go tomorrow?" Mitchell asked, approaching Marcus's bunk with genuine curiosity rather than his usual mocking tone. "I'll do my best," Marcus replied quietly. "You know, after watching you shoot this week, I'm starting to think there might be more to you than meets the eye," Mitchell continued. "That grouping you shot on Tuesday was something else. Collins has been training snipers for 2 decades, and even he was impressed." Marcus looked up, surprised by the unexpected encouragement. "Thank you. That means something coming from you. Don't get me wrong. You've still got work to do on the physical side," Mitchell added with a slight grin. "But shooting like that, that's not something you can teach. Either you have it, or you don't." As the conversation continued, more recruits drifted over, drawn by curiosity about the quiet man who had been consistently producing exceptional results on the range. For the first time since arriving at the facility, Marcus found himself at the center of attention, and while it was uncomfortable, it wasn't entirely unwelcome. "Where exactly did you learn to shoot?" asked Thompson, a former Marine whose own marksmanship credentials were impressive. "I mean, that kind of precision doesn't just happen." Marcus hesitated, unsure how much to reveal about his background. His grandfather had been more than just a gamekeeper. He had been a sniper instructor for Special Forces units during the Cold War, though that was something he had rarely discussed even within the family. "My grandfather taught me," Marcus said finally. "He believed that shooting was about more than just technical skill. He used to say that the best marksmen were the ones who could become completely still inside, no matter what was happening around them." "Sounds like he knew what he was talking about," Parker interjected. "The mental game is everything at the highest levels. I've seen blokes who could shoot like machines on the range fall apart completely when the pressure was real." The conversation continued late into the evening, with recruits sharing their own experiences and theories about marksmanship. For Marcus, it was the first time he had felt truly included in the group, and despite his nervousness about the upcoming assessment, he went to sleep feeling more optimistic about his place in the program. Dawn brought with it a crisp October morning and the kind of atmospheric conditions that would make accurate shooting challenging. A steady crosswind gusted across the range complex, and intermittent cloud cover created constantly changing light conditions. The assessment would take place on the most advanced range available, with computer-controlled targets that could simulate movement and varying distances. The recruits assembled at the range to find it transformed from the familiar training facility they had been using. Electronic scoring systems had been installed at every firing point, and large displays showed real-time wind readings and atmospheric data. The civilian observers had been joined by additional personnel, including what appeared to be members of various international special operations units. Colonel Reed stepped forward to explain the assessment format. "This will consist of 3 phases, each designed to test different aspects of marksmanship under pressure. Phase 1 is precision shooting at known distances under challenging conditions. Phase 2 involves engaging multiple targets at unknown distances with limited ammunition. Phase 3 is a surprise that will test your ability to adapt and perform under circumstances you cannot prepare for. The recruits drew numbers to determine shooting order, and Marcus found himself assigned to fire in the middle of the group. This meant he would have the advantage of observing several shooters before his turn, but also the pressure of performing after others had set the standard. The first few shooters produced competent but unremarkable results. The challenging conditions and the pressure of observation took their toll, with even experienced marksmen struggling to achieve their usual standards. Parker shot well, but not exceptionally, managing tight groups that were slightly off-center due to wind miscalculation. Mitchell's performance was solid, but showed the effects of trying too hard, with slight inconsistencies that would have been irrelevant in combat, but were magnified under such scrutiny. When Marcus's turn arrived, he approached the firing point with his usual methodical preparation, seemingly unaffected by the pressure that had clearly impacted several previous shooters. He spent several minutes studying the wind indicators and making calculations, his movements deliberate and unhurried, despite the time constraints. Colonel Reed watched with particular interest as Marcus settled into his shooting position. There was something different about the young recruit's demeanor, a stillness that seemed to emanate from somewhere deep within. While other shooters had shown visible signs of tension and concentration, Marcus appeared to enter a state of complete calm. His first shot rang out across the range, followed seconds later by the electronic confirmation of a perfect hit on the target at 800 meters. The second and third shots followed with mechanical precision, each one finding the small aiming point despite the gusty crosswind. By the time Marcus had completed his 10-round string, it was clear that something extraordinary was taking place. The electronic scoring system displayed the results with unforgiving accuracy. 10 rounds fired, 10 hits within the small scoring zone, with a group size that defied the challenging conditions. Colonel Reed exchanged glances with his colleagues, their expressions showing a mixture of surprise and professional appreciation. Phase 2 introduced unknown distance shooting, requiring each marksman to range their targets using only their optical equipment and experience. Targets appeared at distances between 400 and 1,200 meters, requiring rapid calculations and immediate engagement. The pressure intensified as ammunition was strictly limited, making each shot critical. Marcus approached this phase with the same methodical precision that had characterized his earlier performance. He spent precious seconds studying each target through his scope, making calculations that others attempted to rush through in their eagerness to engage. When he finally fired, each shot was deliberate and precisely aimed, with no wasted ammunition or hurried follow-up shots. The results spoke for themselves. While other shooters achieved respectable hit rates of 60 to 70%, Marcus managed to engage every target successfully, his accuracy seemingly unaffected by the unknown distances and time pressure. The observers began paying closer attention to his technique, noting the way he seemed to enter a zone of complete focus that shut out all external distractions. As the second phase concluded, word of Marcus's performance had spread among the instructors and observers. Even his fellow recruits, despite their competitive nature, couldn't help but acknowledge that they were witnessing something special. The quiet outsider was not just shooting well. He was demonstrating a level of skill that even the most experienced among them had rarely encountered. Colonel Reed approached Marcus as he cleared his weapon after the second phase. "Son, I've been evaluating marksmen for 25 years, and what I just witnessed was exceptional. Where exactly did you develop these skills?" Marcus looked up from his rifle, his expression still showing the calm focus that had characterized his shooting. "My grandfather, sir. He taught me that shooting was about more than just technical skill. He said the weapon was just a tool. The real skill was in becoming completely still inside." "Your grandfather must have been quite a teacher." Yes, sir. He was thorough in his instruction. Reed nodded slowly, processing this information. There was clearly more to Marcus's background than appeared in his official records, but that was a conversation for another time. Right now, he was more interested in seeing how the young recruit would handle the final phase of the assessment. The third phase was announced with characteristic directness by Colonel Reed. This final test will simulate a real-world scenario where precision, speed, and adaptability are equally important. You will be presented with a tactical situation that requires immediate assessment and response. The targets, distances, and conditions will be unknown until the moment you begin. A hush fell over the assembled recruits as they realized they would be facing something entirely outside their preparation and experience. This was the kind of test that revealed true capability under pressure, where technical skill had to be combined with tactical thinking and mental toughness. The scenario was designed to simulate a hostage rescue situation, with multiple targets at varying distances and innocent civilians interspersed among hostile figures. Each marksman would have 60 seconds to assess the situation, identify priority targets, and engage them in order of tactical importance. The computer-controlled targets would move and react, creating a dynamic environment that changed constantly. The first several shooters struggled with the complexity of the scenario. Even experienced special operations veterans found it challenging to rapidly process the tactical situation while maintaining the precision necessary for successful engagement. Some focused too heavily on speed and compromised accuracy, while others became paralyzed by the complexity and failed to engage enough targets within the time limit. Parker managed a competent performance, his Special Forces background evident in his tactical assessment of the scenario. However, even his experience couldn't entirely compensate for the pressure and complexity of the situation, and his final score reflected several missed opportunities and one questionable target selection. When Marcus's turn arrived, the atmosphere around the range had shifted. Word of his exceptional performance in the earlier phases had drawn additional observers, including several senior officers who had come specifically to witness what everyone was calling an exceptional display of marksmanship. The pressure would have been overwhelming for most recruits, but Marcus seemed to draw strength from the intense focus required. As the scenario began, Marcus's transformation was immediate and total. The methodical, quiet recruit disappeared, replaced by someone who moved with the fluid efficiency of a predator. His assessment of the tactical situation was instantaneous, his priority targeting logical and precise. The rifle seemed to become an extension of his body as he engaged target after target with shots that were both rapid and devastatingly accurate. The computer scoring system tracked every engagement in real time, displaying hit probability, target priority assessment, and tactical decision-making scores. As Marcus moved through the scenario with mechanical precision, the scores climbed to levels that the observers had never seen before. Each shot found its mark, each target selection was tactically sound, and his time management was perfect. When the 60 seconds expired, the range fell silent except for the electronic confirmation of his final score. The display showed what everyone already knew. They had just witnessed a performance that would be talked about for years to come. Marcus had not just passed the assessment, he had redefined what was possible under such conditions. Colonel Reed stepped forward, his usual stoic demeanor replaced by unmistakable admiration. "Son, in 25 years of evaluating special operations personnel, I have never seen shooting like that. You didn't just exceed the standards, you obliterated them." The other recruits stood in stunned silence, finally understanding that they had been sharing barracks with someone extraordinary. The quiet outsider who had endured weeks of subtle mockery and condescension had just demonstrated abilities that even the most elite among them could only aspire to achieve. Parker was the first to break the silence, walking over to Marcus with an expression of genuine respect and amazement. "Bloody hell, mate. Where the fuck did that come from?" Marcus looked around at the faces surrounding him. Instructors, observers, and fellow recruits all staring at him with a mixture of awe and disbelief. For the first time since arriving at the facility, he was not being looked down upon or dismissed. Instead, he saw the kind of respect that was earned only through demonstrated excellence under pressure. "I told you," he said quietly, his voice carrying a new confidence that hadn't been there before. "My grandfather was a very thorough teacher." As the assessment concluded and the results were formally announced, it became clear that Marcus Thompson had not just won a competition. He had announced himself as something special. The selection for the joint training exercise was never in doubt, but more importantly, he had earned something that no amount of training could provide: the unqualified respect of his peers and superiors. Colonel Reed approached Marcus as the crowd began to disperse, his expression serious but pleased. "Son, I need to ask you something, and I want a straight answer. That level of shooting doesn't come from weekend instruction with a gamekeeper grandfather. Where did you really learn to shoot like that?" Marcus met his gaze steadily, weighing how much to reveal about his background. Finally, he spoke quietly. His words meant only for Reed's ears. "My grandfather was Sergeant Major Robert Thompson, Royal Marines. He spent 15 years as a sniper instructor for various special operations units. Everything he knew, he passed on to me." Reed nodded slowly, the pieces finally fitting together. "And you never thought to mention this in your background interview?" "He made me promise never to trade on his reputation, said I had to earn my own place based on my own abilities." "Well, son, I'd say you've done exactly that." As the day ended and the recruits returned to their barracks, the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. Marcus was no longer the outsider looking in. He had become the center of attention in a way that both thrilled and unsettled him. The quiet confidence he had always possessed was finally matched by the external recognition of his abilities. But perhaps more importantly, he had proven something to himself. Despite the physical limitations and quiet demeanor that had made him easy to underestimate, he possessed a skill that was valued at the highest levels of military service. For the first time in his career, he began to truly understand his own worth as a soldier. The evening mess hall buzzed with conversation about the day's events, and for once, Marcus found himself at the center of every discussion. His table was surrounded by recruits eager to understand how such shooting was possible, what techniques he employed, and whether such skills could be learned or were simply innate gifts. "It's not magic," Marcus explained to the gathered group, finally comfortable enough to share some of his knowledge. "It's about understanding that the rifle is just one component of a complex system. Wind, distance, atmospheric pressure, target movement, even your own heartbeat and breathing, everything affects the shot." "But how do you process all that information so quickly?" asked Thompson, still struggling to understand what he had witnessed. "Practice," Marcus replied simply. "My grandfather used to say that preparation was everything. The more thoroughly you understand your equipment and environment, the faster you can make accurate decisions under pressure." As the conversation continued, Marcus realized that something fundamental had changed in his relationship with the other recruits. The respect was genuine, earned through demonstrated performance rather than granted through reputation or assumption. For the first time since arriving at the facility, he felt like he truly belonged among these elite soldiers. The evening concluded with Colonel Reed making an announcement that surprised no one, but formalized what everyone already understood. Marcus Thompson would be representing the Royal Guard training program in the Joint International Training Exercise, an honor that would take him to work alongside the most elite military units in the world. As Marcus lay in his bunk that night, surrounded by the quiet sounds of 30 men processing the day's events, he reflected on how dramatically his circumstances had changed. In a single afternoon, he had transformed from an underestimated outsider to one of the most respected recruits in the program. The shooting had revealed abilities that even he hadn't fully understood, and more importantly, it had given him the confidence to embrace his place among the elite soldiers he had once felt so distant from. But perhaps most significantly, he had proven his grandfather's most important lesson, that true ability, when combined with proper preparation and mental discipline, would always reveal itself when circumstances demanded excellence. The quiet gamekeeper's grandson had found his place among warriors, and nothing would ever be the same again. The transformation in Marcus Thompson's standing within the Royal Guard training program was immediate and profound. Where once he had been the quiet outsider struggling to find his place among elite soldiers, he was now the subject of intense interest and genuine respect from instructors and recruits alike. The morning after his extraordinary shooting demonstration, he woke to find his usual solitary breakfast routine interrupted by a steady stream of fellow recruits seeking his insight and advice. "Thompson," called Sergeant Major Hartley as Marcus entered the mess hall, his voice carrying none of the skeptical undertone that had characterized their previous interactions. "Colonel Harrison wants to see you in his office after breakfast. Don't keep him waiting." The walk to the colonel's office felt different now, with instructors and staff members acknowledging him with nods of recognition rather than the dismissive glances he had grown accustomed to receiving. Word of his performance had clearly spread throughout the entire facility, and Marcus found himself wondering how dramatically his circumstances were about to change. Colonel Harrison's office was a study in military tradition and personal achievement, its walls lined with photographs of distinguished graduates and ceremonial weapons from various Commonwealth nations. The colonel himself sat behind an imposing oak desk, his bearing as formal as ever, but his expression showed unmistakable satisfaction as Marcus entered and came to attention. "At ease, Thompson," Harrison said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "I think we can dispense with excessive formality, given the circumstances." Marcus sat carefully, still uncertain about what this meeting might entail. His experience had taught him to be cautious about sudden changes in treatment, particularly when they seemed too positive to be entirely real. "I've just finished reviewing the detailed assessment reports from yesterday's evaluation," Harrison continued, lifting a thick folder from his desk. "Colonel Reed and his team have provided some rather remarkable observations about your performance." He opened the folder and began reading selected passages, his voice taking on the tone of someone delivering genuinely surprising news. Quote, "Demonstrated marksmanship abilities at a level typically associated with Tier 1 Special Operations snipers with years of advanced training and combat experience." End quote. Marcus felt his cheeks redden with embarrassment, unused to being the subject of such praise. "There's more," Harrison continued. Quote, "Mental composure under extreme pressure exceptional. Tactical decision-making superior to many experienced special operations personnel. Recommend immediate consideration for advanced sniper training and special projects assignment." End quote. The colonel closed the folder and leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with the expression that mixed professional interest with paternal pride. "Thompson, I've been running this program for 8 years, and I've seen some exceptional soldiers come through these doors. But what you demonstrated yesterday was something entirely different." "Thank you, sir. This creates certain opportunities for you, but also certain responsibilities," Harrison continued. "Colonel Reed has specifically requested your participation in an international counterterrorism training exercise that begins next month. This would involve working alongside Delta Force, SAS, GIGN, and other elite units in scenarios that simulate real-world special operations missions." Marcus felt his pulse quicken at the prospect of such an opportunity, but Harrison wasn't finished. Additionally, there's been informal discussion about fast-tracking you through the remainder of the Royal Guard program and immediately assigning you to specialized duties that would make full use of your particular skills. However, I want to be clear about what this means. The colonel's tone became more serious, his gaze intensifying. Excellence brings visibility, and visibility brings expectations. If you accept these opportunities, you'll be operating at a level where there's no margin for error and no tolerance for anything less than perfection. Are you prepared for that level of responsibility? Marcus considered the question carefully, thinking about his grandfather's teachings about the weight of exceptional ability. Yes, sir. I believe I am. Good. Your participation in the international exercise is confirmed, and we'll discuss the accelerated program progression after you return. Harrison stood, extending his hand across the desk. Congratulations, Thompson. You've earned every bit of this recognition. As Marcus left the colonel's office, his mind raced with the implications of what had just occurred. In less than 24 hours, he had gone from struggling recruit to being personally selected for international special operations training. The magnitude of the change was almost overwhelming, but it also felt like the natural result of years of preparation and dedication finally being recognized. The remainder of the day brought a series of administrative meetings and briefings related to his upcoming assignment. He met with intelligence officers who provided background on the participating units and the training scenarios they would encounter. Medical staff conducted additional health assessments to ensure he was cleared for the physical demands of advanced special operations training. Most significantly, he spent several hours with Colonel Reed, who had remained at the facility specifically to discuss the upcoming exercise. Son, I want you to understand what you're walking into, Reed said as they sat in a secure briefing room away from the normal training activities. This exercise involves personnel who represent the absolute pinnacle of military special operations. These are people who have operated in the most dangerous environments on Earth, many of them with years of combat experience. Marcus nodded, understanding the implicit warning about the level of expertise he would be expected to match. What happened yesterday was remarkable, but it was also just a demonstration under controlled conditions, Reed continued. The real test comes when you're operating alongside these units in scenarios designed to push everyone to their absolute limits. Are you ready for that? I hope so, sir. Hope isn't enough. These people will be watching everything you do, evaluating whether you truly belong at their level or whether yesterday was just an anomaly. They won't cut you any slack because of your age or relative inexperience. Reed leaned forward, his expression becoming more intense. But here's what I think, based on what I observed yesterday. You have a natural ability that can't be taught, combined with a level of mental discipline that I rarely see even among experienced special operations personnel. If you can maintain that composure under the stress of realistic scenarios, you'll not only succeed, you'll excel. The conversation continued for another hour, covering everything from equipment requirements to the political sensitivities of international training exercises. When it concluded, Marcus felt both excited and slightly overwhelmed by the prospect of what lay ahead. His return to the barracks that evening was markedly different from any previous day since arriving at the facility. The usual evening routine of equipment maintenance and casual conversation was interrupted by a steady stream of recruits seeking his attention and advice. Even Parker, who had established himself as one of the informal leaders among the group, approached with genuine curiosity about Marcus's background and training methods. "Look, mate," Parker said, settling onto the edge of Marcus's bunk with the easy familiarity of someone whose respect had been completely won. "I've been around special operations for 10 years, and I thought I'd seen everything. What you did yesterday was something else entirely." "Thank you." "No, seriously. I've worked with SAS snipers who are legends in their own right, and none of them could have pulled off what you did under those conditions. The question everyone's asking is how someone with your background developed those skills." Marcus had been dreading this conversation, knowing that his fellow recruits would eventually demand a more complete explanation of his abilities. He had promised his grandfather never to trade on his reputation, but the circumstances seemed to call for at least partial honesty. "My grandfather was more than just a gamekeeper," he said finally. "He spent 15 years as a sniper instructor for various special operations units during the Cold War. Everything he knew about shooting, field craft, and mental discipline, he passed on to me." Parker's eyebrows rose significantly. "Royal Marines?" "Yes. Sergeant Major Robert Thompson. He retired in 1985 but continued working as a civilian instructor for another decade." "Bloody hell," Parker muttered. "Bob Thompson. I've heard stories about him from some of the older SAS blokes. They said he could outshoot anyone and that his trainees were some of the best snipers the British military ever produced." Marcus nodded, finally understanding why his grandfather had insisted on anonymity. His reputation had preceded him even into retirement, and the temptation to rely on that legacy rather than building his own would have been enormous. "He made me promise to earn my own place based on my own abilities," Marcus explained. "Said that borrowing someone else's reputation was the quickest way to never develop your own." "Sounds like wise advice," Parker replied. "And based on what happened yesterday, I'd say you've definitely earned your own place." The conversation expanded as other recruits joined in, and for the first time since arriving at the facility, Marcus found himself sharing stories of his training and background. The atmosphere was markedly different from the earlier weeks. Instead of being questioned or mocked, he was being treated as a valued source of knowledge and expertise. Mitchell approached the group later in the evening, his usual skeptical demeanor replaced by genuine curiosity. "Thompson, I've got to ask, when you were shooting yesterday, it looked like you entered some kind of zone. Everything around you just seemed to disappear. How do you do that?" Marcus considered the question carefully, remembering his grandfather's teachings about the mental aspects of precision shooting. "It's something my grandfather called stillness. He said that most people think shooting is about controlling the rifle, but it's really about controlling yourself." "What do you mean?" "Every emotion, every distraction, every physical tension affects your ability to shoot precisely. The rifle will only be as steady as the person holding it, so you learn to become completely still inside, regardless of what's happening around you." "And how exactly do you learn that?" asked Thompson, the former Marine, his professional interest clearly engaged. "Practice. Thousands of hours of practice, starting with dry firing exercises where you learn to control your breathing, heartbeat, and muscle tension. Then you progress to live firing under increasingly challenging conditions until maintaining that stillness becomes automatic." Marcus spent the next hour sharing specific techniques and training methodologies, finding himself in the unusual position of being the teacher rather than the student. The other recruits listened with the intensity of people who recognized genuine expertise when they encountered it, asking detailed questions about everything from breathing techniques to mental preparation strategies. As the evening wound down and the barracks settled into its normal nighttime routine, Marcus reflected on how dramatically his circumstances had changed. Not only had he earned recognition for his abilities, but he had finally found acceptance among peers whose respect meant something significant. More importantly, he had begun to understand his own potential in ways that extended far beyond simple marksmanship skills. The following weeks passed quickly as Marcus prepared for his departure to the international training exercise. His performance in the regular Royal Guard training program continued to improve across all areas, but it was his shooting that drew the most attention. Instructors began using his techniques as examples for other recruits, and he found himself providing informal coaching to soldiers who had previously dismissed him as inadequate. Perhaps most significantly, his confidence in other areas began to improve as well. Physical training sessions that had once been sources of embarrassment became opportunities to demonstrate the mental toughness that had made his shooting so exceptional. While he would never match the raw physical capabilities of larger recruits, his determination and pain tolerance began earning respect in their own right. 3 weeks after his remarkable demonstration, Marcus found himself boarding a military transport aircraft bound for a classified training facility in the Scottish Highlands. The other passengers were a mix of personnel from various international special operations units, their casual conversation peppered with references to operations and experiences that represented the highest levels of military service. Colonel Reed had arranged for Marcus to travel with a small group of American Special Operations personnel, partly for practical reasons, but primarily to begin integrating him into the international community he would be working with. The Americans were initially skeptical of the young British soldier who looked more like a university student than an elite warrior, but Reed's introductions carried sufficient weight to ensure respectful treatment. "So, you're the shooter everyone's been talking about," said Master Sergeant Williams, a Delta Force sniper with 20 years of experience and a reputation that extended throughout the special operations community. "Reed says you put on quite a show." "I did my best," Marcus replied modestly. "Your best was apparently pretty impressive. Mind if I ask where you learned to shoot like that?" Marcus provided the same explanation he had given his fellow recruits, but Williams's reaction suggested a deeper level of understanding than most people possessed. "Bob Thompson, you said? Royal Marine sniper instructor?" "Yes." "You knew him?" "By reputation. We had some of his former students as instructors when I was coming up through the ranks. They all said the same thing, that he could outshoot anyone and that his training methods were about 20 years ahead of their time." Williams studied Marcus more carefully, his initial skepticism replaced by professional interest. "If you learned everything you know from him, then this exercise is going to be very interesting indeed." The flight continued with conversations that gradually drew Marcus into the informal community of elite soldiers surrounding him. These were people who had operated in the most dangerous environments on Earth, whose experiences included everything from hostage rescues to deep reconnaissance missions behind enemy lines. Despite their elite status, they treated him with the respect accorded to a proven professional, and Marcus began to understand that his shooting demonstration had earned him a place in a very exclusive fraternity. The training facility where they landed was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. Situated in a remote highland valley, it featured ranges and training areas designed to simulate every conceivable operational environment. Urban combat facilities sat alongside mountain warfare courses, while specialized buildings provided realistic settings for hostage rescue and counter-terrorism scenarios. The first briefing took place in a conference room filled with personnel from 12 different countries, representing the most elite units from each nation. The exercise director, a British SAS lieutenant colonel named Harrison, outlined a training program that would push everyone to their absolute limits over the course of 3 weeks. "Gentlemen, this exercise is designed to identify and develop the next generation of special operations leaders," Harrison began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned his position through demonstrated excellence under fire. "You are here because you represent the best your respective units have to offer, but I want to be clear about expectations." He gestured to a large display showing the exercise parameters. "You will be operating in mixed international teams, facing scenarios designed by people with extensive real-world experience in counterterrorism, hostage rescue, and special reconnaissance operations. Every decision you make will be evaluated, every shot you fire will be analyzed, and every leadership choice will be assessed." Marcus listened with growing excitement and nervousness as the scope of the exercise became clear. This wasn't just advanced training, it was a comprehensive evaluation of potential that would influence the trajectory of his entire military career. "The scenarios you'll face are based on actual operations conducted by various special operations units over the past decade," Harrison continued. "Some of you will excel, some will struggle, and some will discover capabilities you didn't know you possessed. All of you will be changed by this experience." As the briefing concluded and the participants were divided into mixed international teams, Marcus found himself assigned to a group that included personnel from Delta Force, SAS, German GSG-9, and French GIGN. The team leader was Captain Sarah Mitchell, an SAS officer whose reputation for tactical innovation and leadership under pressure was well known throughout the special operations community. "Thompson," she said, as the team assembled for their first planning session, "Colonel Reed provided some interesting background on your shooting abilities. I'm looking forward to seeing how those skills translate to operational scenarios." "I'll do my best to contribute, ma'am." "I'm sure you will. But I want you to understand that this exercise will test more than just marksmanship. You'll be making tactical decisions that affect the entire team, communicating under stress and adapting to situations that change faster than you can process them." Captain Mitchell's expression became more serious. "Your shooting demonstration was impressive, but this is where we find out if you have what it takes to operate at the highest levels of special operations. Are you ready for that?" Marcus met her gaze steadily, feeling the same calm focus that had served him so well on the shooting range. "Yes, ma'am. I'm ready." The first operational scenario began before dawn the following morning, with Marcus's team tasked with conducting a hostage rescue in an urban environment that had been carefully designed to simulate real-world conditions. The facility included actual buildings, realistic lighting, and even civilian role players whose reactions would affect the success or failure of the mission. As his team moved into position in the pre-dawn darkness, Marcus felt the familiar sensation of his mind focusing down to laser-like intensity. The months of training, the years of preparation with his grandfather, and the recent recognition of his abilities all crystallized into a single moment of perfect clarity about his role and capabilities. The mission unfolded with the fluid complexity that characterized real special operations, requiring split-second decisions and precise execution under extreme pressure. Marcus found himself in an overwatch position, responsible for providing sniper support while his teammates conducted the actual rescue operation. When the moment came for him to engage hostile targets, the rifle felt like an extension of his body, his shots finding their marks with the mechanical precision that had become his trademark. But more importantly, his tactical decision-making proved to be as sharp as his shooting, his communications clear and concise, and his ability to adapt to changing circumstances exceptional. As the exercise concluded and the team assembled for debriefing, Captain Mitchell's expression showed a mixture of satisfaction and genuine surprise. "Thompson, that was outstanding work. Your shooting was everything we expected, but your tactical awareness and team integration exceeded all projections." Master Sergeant Williams, who had been monitoring the exercise from a command post, approached with undisguised admiration. "Son, I've been doing this for 20 years, and what I just watched was special operations at its finest. You didn't just perform well, you elevated everyone around you." The 3 weeks that followed confirmed what that first mission had suggested. Marcus Thompson had found his true calling. Each successive scenario revealed new dimensions of his capabilities, from complex multi-target engagements to leadership roles that required balancing multiple priorities under extreme pressure. More significantly, his quiet competence and unshakable calm under stress began inspiring the same qualities in his teammates. By the conclusion of the exercise, Marcus had not only proven himself worthy of inclusion among the world's elite special operations personnel, but had established himself as someone with the potential for extraordinary achievement in that community. The final evaluation, conducted by senior officers from all participating nations, concluded with language typically reserved for the most exceptional candidates. Colonel Reed, who had remained at the facility to observe the exercise, approached Marcus during the closing ceremony with an expression of satisfaction and pride. Son, 3 weeks ago you were just a Royal Guard recruit with exceptional shooting skills. Today you're being recommended for immediate assignment to special operations duties with strong endorsement for accelerated promotion. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. You earned every bit of this recognition. But I want you to understand what comes next. You'll be operating in environments where the margin for error is essentially zero, where the stakes involve not just mission success, but human lives. Reed's expression became more serious. You've proven you have the skills and temperament for this work, but you're still young and relatively inexperienced. The next few years will determine whether you become just another competent special operations soldier or something truly exceptional. As Marcus prepared to return to England and begin the next phase of his military career, he reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought him to this point. The quiet outsider who had been laughed at during initial training had not only proven himself among elite soldiers, but had discovered capabilities that even he hadn't fully understood. His grandfather's teachings about preparation, mental discipline, and the patience to wait for the right moment had proven their worth beyond anything he could have imagined. More importantly, he had learned that true capability, when combined with proper preparation and unwavering dedication, would always reveal itself when circumstances demanded excellence. The flight back to England provided time for reflection on how dramatically his circumstances had changed. 6 months earlier, he had been just another soldier with good shooting skills, hoping to earn a place in the Royal Guard. Now he was preparing for assignment to one of Britain's most elite special operations units, with international recognition for capabilities that placed him among the finest soldiers of his generation. But perhaps most significantly, he had finally understood his grandfather's most important lesson. That exceptional ability carried with it exceptional responsibility. The skills that had once seemed like simple recreational shooting had revealed themselves to be tools for serving at the highest levels of military service. The quiet gamekeeper's grandson had found his place among warriors, and he was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. As the aircraft approached British airspace, Marcus Thompson looked forward to a future that held possibilities he could barely have imagined just months before. The laughter of his fellow recruits during those early training days seemed like a distant memory, replaced by the respect and recognition of some of the finest soldiers in the world. He had proven that true capability, properly developed and patiently revealed, would always find its rightful place among those who understood and valued excellence.